In the weeks following the terrorist attacks on our nation, I authorized the National Security Agency, consistent with U.S. law and the Constitution, to intercept the international communications of people with known links to Al-Qaeda and related terrorist organizations. Its purpose is to detect and prevent terrorist attacks against the United States, our friends and allies. Revealing classified information is illegal, alerts our enemies, and endangers our country.
The United States only uses signals intelligence for legitimate national security purposes and not for the purpose of indiscriminately reviewing the emails or phone calls of ordinary folks. The United States does not collect intelligence to suppress criticism or dissent, nor do we collect intelligence to disadvantage people on the basis of their ethnicity or race or gender or sexual orientation or religious beliefs. We do not collect intelligence to provide a competitive advantage to U.S. companies or U.S. commercial sectors. And in terms of our bulk collection of signals intelligence, U.S. intelligence agencies will only use such data to meet specific security requirements: counterintelligence, counterterrorism, counterproliferation, cybersecurity, force protection for our troops and our allies, and combating transnational crime, including sanctions evasion.
This was my belief, that these things were violations of written statutory laws or our basic constitutional principles.
No, I'm not going to be scrambling jets to get a 29-year-old hacker.
It's not Edward Snowden who is a criminal or who has done something bad, but it's Edward Snowden who is a whistleblower, who has done what is necessary as a whistleblower. And I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed that no EU government stands up to say that he is a witness and that we have to get him here into the European Union to get the facts on the table.
But one of the central questions is, why did I come forward? Why does it matter? And how does this impact the way we're living now? And I think the central nexus that's affecting everybody the most right now, particularly in this current moment of news, is the fact that we're all being watched, right? Regardless of whether we're doing anything right or wrong. And this is a fundamental change, and this is what drove me forward. Traditionally, the work of intelligence services, the work of surveillance agencies, of police investigators, had always been particularly and specifically targeted towards individuals who we had probable cause that had been demonstrated to a court were up to no good. Foreign spies, military units from adversarial nations. These were the guys that we were watching. But with the rise of the internet, right, advances in our science, our understanding of math, the way things are tied together, the communications network, and the way it has sort of swallowed the earth, radically changed the dynamic. Now, surveillance technologies have outpaced democratic controls. Those things that we used to enjoy a generation ago were primarily the product of one particular technological peculiarity, which is that surveillance was expensive, extremely so. Governments had to spend extraordinary sums to track individuals. You had to have whole groups of people tracking one individual. But now, thanks to this rise in technology, that has been reversed entirely. Now you can have one guy sitting somewhere completely far away from the target, like myself, at the NSA in Hawaii, who can track with extreme precision an unimaginably large number of people, Rather than having whole teams following one person, now you have one person following whole groups, whole individuals. And they don't have to be connected in any way. And this means for the first time in human history, it's both technologically and financially feasible for governments to track and store nearly complete records of all of our lives. And this is not science fiction. This is happening now. We don't know. We have no idea what the government is actually doing. And that is not just a risk. That is a fundamental danger to the stability of any open and liberal society. Suddenly, we have a set of rules for all of you. There's a set of rules that can get whistleblowers and journalists charged and investigated by police. But what about when police break the law? What about when spies break the law? Suddenly, they're being held to a very different legal standard, and they're entitled to a veil of secrecy that inoculates them against criticism and scrutiny that the rest of us do not enjoy. That is an imbalance of power that is not only unwise, but is actually anti-democratic. It is authoritarian in nature. It's this question, this dynamic, where our governments are increasingly invested with extraordinary capabilities to peer into all of our private lives with very little interference, whereas we, the public, can know almost nothing about how they operate. This inverts the traditional dynamic of private citizens and public officials into this brave new world we're facing of private officials and public citizens. You're kidding yourself if you think intelligence officials in France, Germany, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Brazil, India aren't doing the same thing. This is how they operate. How do we trust and ensure that we can trust these intelligence agencies and officials to interpret the law fairly, to operate fairly? And the answer is you can't. But what you can do is put processes and instructions in place where you don't have to. And the way you do that is you appoint a judicial body, some mechanism, some structure, some commission that has independent prosecutorial authority that is mandated to perform a case-by-case review of these intelligence agencies, these police agencies, their use of powers, exceptional powers, after the fact of investigation to ensure that no illegalities occurred. And if they did occur, they can then prosecute on this basis. The only thing that will ensure that these intelligence agencies or police agencies or even corporations, as they gain access to these kind of mass surveillance capabilities, play fairly is the threat of criminal sanction. Wake of 2013. The President of the United States, trying to push back against the belief and public presentation that the NSA was conducting mass surveillance, tried to contextualize things.
When it comes to telephone calls, nobody is listening to your telephone calls. That's not what this program's about. What the intelligence community is doing is looking at phone numbers and durations of calls. They are not looking at people's names, and they're not looking at content. But by sifting through this so-called metadata, they may identify potential leads with respect to folks who might engage in terrorism. Now, with respect to the internet and emails, this does not apply to U.S. citizens, and it does not apply to people living in the United States.
Metadata, for those who aren't familiar with it, the content of communications is what you're actually saying on the phone call, what you're actually writing in the body of the email, what you actually write inside the Facebook message. Metadata is one step out from that, and it has no meaningful legal protections in our current Western jurisprudence, which is the real danger, because the government holds that you don't actually own records of your activities, right? You only have a privacy interest in actually what you say, but not anything that anybody records about when you said it, how you said it, how long it took you to say it, things like that. So now they're doing that instantly for everyone always because it's cheap, it's easy, it's free. By following your cell phones, right? Where does your cell phone go at night? What other cell phones are around that cell phone? The laptop that you're using, right? What networks does it connect to? Every network adapter, right? Whether it's the Wi-Fi card, whether it's the Ethernet port, whether it's the radio in your phone, has what's called a universally unique identifier or globally unique identifier, right? These, you can think of them as little tags that are burned into the hardware of the device. They can't be changed on a permanent basis, at least without serious expertise. And this means that every time you connect to one of these networks, your device is different from every other device in the world that could be connecting to it. There are meaningful technical reasons for this to happen, right? This wasn't a surveillance scheme, but a byproduct of this is that suddenly the devices that were designed to empower you can now be used to disempower you. They can be used to make you vulnerable. They can be used to watch you. And that is what's happening. Metadata in bulk, this collection that's happening with everyone, and no court needs to be involved because, again, they say you don't own these records. Facebook owns these records. The cell phone company owns this record of where your cell phone went, not you, right? So they can do whatever they want with it. They can hand it to the government voluntarily. They can provide it in response to a subpoena or a court order. What if the government cuts out the middleman and starts doing it themselves by tapping the cross-border fiber optic communications that connect, for example, Canada to the United States or other countries? Well, the problem is the internet doesn't live in Canada, right? The internet lives all over the world. So the minute your communications go to Facebook or Google or Yahoo or anything like this, any major service that anybody's using, you go to iTunes, that's creating a record that these people now didn't have to go to court to have on you. When you have enough metadata, you don't need the content. Metadata is a proxy for content because machines can analyze it in a way that content can't. Metadata creates perfect records of private lives. This is a danger of having companies that store enormous amounts of data on their customers. If you build it, they will come.
The challenges to our privacy do not come from government alone. Corporations of all shapes and sizes track what you buy, store and analyze our data, and use it for commercial purposes. That's how those targeted ads pop up on your computer and your smartphone periodically.
We have companies that are burdened by a profit motive, right? It's natural and it's right. It's proper that they want to make money. That's why these companies were founded, right? Nobody should begrudge them the chance to make a profit. But at the same time, we should think about which companies we want to support. And we should have mechanisms to understand how these companies are operating, the kind of decisions they are making, and the social costs that are being created as a consequence of their operations. Just as oil companies are starting to face criticism, protest, and divestment of investments as a result of the impact of their industry on our global climate, we should have the same understanding of the consequences of these companies' operation on our digital climate. But right now, it's too opaque. We don't see how these things are operating, and it makes it difficult to say who are the good guys and the bad guys, and I think that has to change. Mass surveillance has never been established as effective for counterterrorism, right? These laws are always passed saying they'll be used against terrorists. But the reality is they're used for other things. These programs were never about terrorism. They're about power. And when you think about these capabilities, or when you think about all the things that they're doing, when you think about what these intelligence agencies do all day, there aren't that many terrorists who are meaningful, who represent a real threat. And they have all of these specialists who work in other areas. What do you think these folks are doing all day? Why do you think these intelligence agencies exist, if not to apply these capabilities for what these officials consider to be the national interest?
The fact of the matter is that the United States, for all our warts, is a country that abides by rule of law, that cares deeply about privacy, that cares about civil liberties, that cares about our Constitution.
These programs were unlawful or unconstitutional. Courts were unwilling to permit legal challenges against the activities of these spy agencies because they said they were speculation. They could say, well, you can't prove you were spied on because it's classified. You don't have access to documents or records. Therefore, we, the courts, even though this could be a violation of your rights or the rights of everyone in the country, don't have a place in this debate because first you have to establish the facts. We had a Congress in the United States that knowingly permitted national security officials to brazenly lie to the public without consequence or even correcting the record. This is a senator in the United States who is questioning the most senior intelligence official in the United States, General James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence. And it is a felony to give false testimony when you are sworn under oath. But that is exactly what happened in 2013, 3 months before I came forward.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly. There are cases where they could inadvertently, perhaps, collect, but not wittingly.
Unfortunately, that was not true. But the thing here is all of the powerful people in the room knew this was a lie, but they didn't correct the record. They allowed the public to be deceived, even though it was, in fact, a crime. The Director of National Intelligence later admitted this was a false statement, saying it was what he considered the least untruthful thing he could say at the time, and too cute by half. But what does it mean in a democracy where the very foundation of the government, the legitimacy of our system, is derived from the idea that we, when we cast our votes, are providing consent for the government to carry out these policies? What this means is we're forced to rely upon democracy's safeguard of last resort, right? That is the fourth estate, meaning our press. Privacy is the fountainhead of all other rights. It is the basis from which the other rights derive their meaning, their value. Freedom of speech doesn't mean very much if you can't figure out what it is that you actually want to say and instead have to repeat what other people say, what's popular, because that's the only thing that's safe to say. Privacy is the right to the self. Privacy is the right to be you.
You can't have 100% security and also then have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience. We're going to have to make some choices as a society.
There's a very popular meme, a mimetic idea that's being passed around governments who try to justify these new intrusions, these new expansions of law over the digital domain, over the activities that are happening in our homes, on our laptops, in our bedrooms, on our cars, wherever we travel, wherever our devices travel, they want to be there too. The government wants to be in your pocket. They want to be in your home. They want to be in your life. And they justify this saying it will keep you safe. It will keep all of us safe. It will defend the status quo. We're doing well. And more than anything else, you should be afraid. You should be afraid. And the solution to that fear is to empower governments. Now, this is also happening by corporations now and other groups. But the central argument here is that the antonym, the opposite of the word privacy, is security, or the opposite of security is privacy, that privacy is this threat that's placing us in danger. But that's not actually how it works. The absence of privacy is not the presence of security. And the presence of security is not the absence of privacy. Rather, the absence of privacy is the presence of censorship. when you can't speak ideas without the judgment of others, you don't share those ideas. You're a little bit more quiet. You're a little bit less free. Privacy is the right to be who you are. Privacy is the right to the self. People say, oh, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, but they miss the point. Privacy isn't about something to hide. Privacy is about something to protect. And that thing is a free and open society. That thing is who you are. That thing is your true beliefs. Privacy is the foundation of all other rights. Freedom of speech doesn't have much meaning if you can only say what's popular without experiencing some retaliation, some backlash. The safety, the security of your ideas doesn't come from men with boots and guns, right? It comes from a recognition that you can test these ideas amongst family, amongst friends, amongst community. You can socialize these ideas to figure out if they're strong enough, if they're ideas that you're proud of, that you can actually circulate and release out into the world, and have them be challenged, have them be protected, right? Freedom of speech doesn't guarantee a freedom from criticism, but it does guarantee a chance to be heard. Freedom of religion, similarly, doesn't have a lot of meaning if you have to adopt a state religion or just what your parents believed in, because doing something different is immediately known and highlighted by the group. You're different, you're strange. And that's where we get to the basic idea that privacy is what enables progress. Privacy is the right to progress. Privacy is what allows us to evolve, because privacy protects those who are a little bit different. If you're the most powerful member of society, you don't need privacy, right? Because you can defend your ideas, your rights, your property, your beliefs in where society should go in the future through other resources, through other mechanisms. You have men with boots and guns, you have money that falls out of the sky, you have access to all of the levers of influence that are out there. But what if you're the minority? What if you're vulnerable in a little bit of any different way, right? If you are different and you are disempowered, you are the one for whom rights are intended the most, because you are the one who faces all of sort of the slings and arrows of opposition, of criticism, of people trying to silence your voice, of people trying to sand away the edges of your difference. They're trying to change who you are because it makes the world more comfortable for them. This is what privacy is about. Privacy is what makes you an individual. Privacy is what makes society open. And if politicians say, well, you need to give up your privacy to make society a little bit safer, what they're trying to actually say, what the translation of that is having a robust and evolving society is unpredictable. It's uncertain. And we're tired of that. We think that we've gone far enough. We think we've moved things to a comfortable point, and we don't need any more change. So what we want you to do is give up your voice, freeze progress where it is right now, and say, enough is enough. I like it here, and we will never take more than another step forward because it introduces uncertainty. But while we can understand that on some level, right? We all want to be safe. We understand the allure of security. It's a false measure, because every point of progress in human history, every advance of human rights, the expansion of dignity that we all enjoy today has begun not only as something that was different, but in many cases a movement that was in fact illegal. When we were trying to do away with monarchies, these were called rebellions. When we were trying to abolish slavery, this was considered to be law-breaking. When we're defending persecuted people, when we're advocating for the enfranchisement of women, all of these things were riots against the established social order. Yes, there is uncertainty in an open society. Yes, we don't know what tomorrow looks like in a democracy. But uncertainty is the price of democracy. That unpredictability is not a weakness, it's a strength. That is the thing that allows us to evolve. This is the challenge, the sharp edge of technology that we seem to be cutting ourselves on today. Is we were promised these capabilities that were intended to raise us up and make us a more enlightened society. In many ways, they are. They free us from labor in new ways. They connect our communities in new ways. They create bonds of fraternity that are uniting human hearts across borders and languages. But at the same time, properties of these systems are being exploited in ways that were never predicted and never intended by the initial engineers who were just trying to make the thing work, right? They weren't trying to make it perfect. They were trying to make it functional. Every phone in every pocket is constantly singing into the sky, saying, here I am, here I am. And cell phone towers are registering those voices. They're taking a note and saying, I was the one that was closest to it. I heard it the loudest. This was for a practical reason, right? It's so when somebody dials your phone number in Germany, every cell phone tower in Germany doesn't go searching for your phone. Only the one tower you're closest to actually sends out that signal. But the unfortunate downside of that practicality, of that efficiency, is that we are in many ways becoming subordinated to our systems of technological capability. And we have to be very careful in the coming decades to make sure that they continue to liberate us as they were intended, rather than fall further down this slope where we've begun to sort of skid and eventually end up being indentured to our technology rather than masters of it. When I came to the belief that these programs were actually a violation of human rights, they were against American values, and they had violated not only the laws of the United States, but the Constitution of the United States. I went to colleagues, co-workers, I went to my bosses, and I showed them evidence of these programs and said, do you think this is right? And of course they went, no, but that's not really our place. In a way, they were right. It's not the place of any one person alone to make these decisions, because they could be wrong. I could have been wrong. But that doesn't mean that you're silent. What that means is that you try to construct the same system of checks and balances that's supposed to keep our government upright, to keep us as individuals, even as dissidents, to the same standard of accountability. And so it was for this reason that I set up a specific system where I shared this information with journalists. They then would remove me from the process, and they agreed to publish no story that was not in the public interest to know, right? They wouldn't publish something just because it's interesting or just because it's newsworthy, but something that was actually necessary to create a freer and more fair society. And I didn't consider this to be sort of a betrayal of commitment to the public, but rather I believe this to be an indication of faith in the public, of loyalty to our values, to make sure that I'm not just trying to light a match and burn it all down on my own. And then, and this is where it got really controversial, I required the journalists in every case, in advance of publication, to go to the government and allow the government to argue with the journalists that any detail in the story that they were going to publish could cause harm to a particular individual. Maybe the journalists didn't understand everything. Maybe I didn't understand everything. Maybe we didn't see the big picture. And one sentence in a story might reveal a human agent behind enemy lines in a place like North Korea, right? And put this person in danger. As far as I know, this process was followed in the publication of every story. Now, it's important to note, this did not give the government a veto over the publication of any stories. It simply gave them a chance to make their case to the journalists, and then the journalists would decide whether to publish it or not. And I'm not aware of any case where the government successfully killed a story. There are a few stories where they changed a detail here or there, but I think that was fair. In 2013, everybody in the United States government stood up and said, this guy and these journalists are traitors. They're going to get people killed. They have blood on their hands. People are going to die over this. We did manage to publish things that changed the laws of the United States. They changed the public's awareness of what the facts of their world actually are, and no one had to die for it. And that's something I'm proud of. Whistleblowers are democracy's safeguard of last resort. In an open society, it doesn't matter whether you work for a corporation, it doesn't matter whether you work for the government, it doesn't matter whether you're on your own, you're an investigative journalist. If you see the structural safeguards protecting the rights of individuals, the safe operation of any system or program of scale, begin to fail, and you can do something about it, and you come forward and you say something about it, that's whistleblowing. Every whistleblower learns from the individuals who came before. I would not have been possible without the examples of Daniel Ellsberg, of William Binney, of Thomas Drake, of Chelsea Manning. Because it is this iterative understanding of our history, how the government operates, how they are likely to respond, how you interact successfully with journalists and unsuccessfully, that informs your thinking, your method of operation, and your belief that change can be achieved. And I'm so thankful for these people who came before, because they show that yes, the NSA will retaliate, the United States government will retaliate, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, regardless of whether they have any grounds of belief. I knew I would be charged with the Espionage Act, despite the fact that I was not a spy. I wasn't contacting foreign governments, I was contacting journalists, because this is what they did to Thomas Drake. This was a senior NSA executive at the very top levels of the agency in the wake of 9/11 who discovered the warrantless wiretapping program. And because they suspected him of telling the media about these programs, even though he went through proper channels, he went to the inspector generals, he went to his supervisors, he went to the lawyers to ask them sort of what was going on, they destroyed him in retaliation. They didn't go, look, he went through the process, he did the right thing, he went to Congress to tell them about what was going on. They said, let's indict him as a spy under the Espionage Act. So he is prohibited from telling the jury why he did what he did. The Espionage Act is one of the few laws in the United States that guarantees you cannot receive a fair trial, and it's designed that way intentionally. And if I had not seen that, I may have made less wise decisions. We have enough examples of whistleblowing today to know that retaliation is not a question, it is a certainty. And when we have a world in which sources and journalists aren't able to go about their work in a safe and confidential way without resorting to the techniques of security agencies and spies, we're already losing.
My continued expectation is that Russia or other countries that have talked about potentially providing Mr. Snowden asylum recognize that they are part of an international community and that they should be abiding by international law. And we'll continue to press them as hard as we can to make sure that they do so.
Donald Trump has appointed a new director of the Central Intelligence Agency who used me as a specific example to say that, look, dissidents should be put to death. And I think that's a fundamentally un-American thing. But we have much bigger problems than my personal situation. I am the least important part of any of this. My effort to contribute to society had the most impact, I think few would argue, in years prior. I will continue to try to contribute to the best of my ability, but if I get hit by a bus or a drone or dropped out of an airplane tomorrow, you know what, it doesn't actually matter that much to me, because I believe in the decisions that I've already made. I've done my best, I will continue to do my best, and I will not be afraid of these kind of policies that fail to understand the most basic truth of any democracy, which is that dissent is patriotic. It's not treason. In the wake of sort of the hack of the US political process that we saw, where these emails got sent loose, Donald Trump was once asked what he thought about that. And rather than condemning it, he said, and I want to quote the words directly here, he said, "Honestly, I wish I had that power. I'd love to have that power to hack anybody's emails, to release whatever he wanted about political opponents or whatever." And now he does. That's the world we live in. I think we all need to recognize that we should be extraordinarily cautious about putting all of our hopes on political candidates, on elected officials. Because if we look at history, their promises very rarely equate to their products. The ultimate answer to democracy here is that we cannot rely on others to do the things that we must do for ourselves. And ultimately, if you want to build a better country, you're going to have to do it yourself.
Given the unique power of the state, it is not enough for leaders to say, "Trust us, we won't abuse the data we collect." For history has too many examples when that trust has been breached. Our liberty cannot depend on the good intentions of those in power. It depends on the law to constrain those in power.
The president does not rule the world, nor does he rule any one of us. We, the individual citizens, the companies that we create, the values that we promote, the systems we build, the conversations that we have, the actions we take every morning when we get up and decide how we're going to move through the day, these are the things that decide our future. Speaking is not enough. It's not enough just to believe in something. You have to stand for something if you want to change things. And that means give your time in some way. If you do have technical capabilities, build tools. If you work at a company, speak up in meetings, try to change the policies. If you don't have either of those, and you don't have the time to dedicate to becoming an expert in these policies, because you have a day job, you've got a family you've got to take care of, give. Invest some level of your resources in the organizations, the civil society groups that will stand up and contest these policies on your behalf, whether it's Amnesty International in Sweden, Human Rights Watch, the American Civil Liberties Union, Freedom of the Press Foundation, or any other group around the world, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Bits of Freedom, or any group, La Quadrature du Net. There are 1,000 groups out there that with your help can do more. So be there, stand up, and be a part of it. When you think about the internet, how it actually works, how it fits together, when you send a text message, when you send a Facebook message, how does that actually get from your phone to the other person's phone, right? Well, it's got to travel over this no man's land of the internet. All of these systems that are physically connected, right? The fiber optic cables, the satellite links, all the radio hops, the microwave connections. You don't see any of this, it just happens, right? But it's there. And all of those people in the middle have a chance to look at that communication. If it's an SMS, right, a normal text message that you send, it's completely unencrypted. Anybody in the middle can read what it is, they can store what it is, they can save what it is. The same thing for normal emails that are sent unencrypted. Web traffic that's not HTTPS at the front of the bar, right? That's just HTTP, that's unencrypted, so anybody can see that. But if you encrypt it now, suddenly all they have is the metadata. They can't actually read that interior transmission. What this means is that governments have been exploiting this property to collect all of that stuff for free as your communications cross the internet electronically naked. Encryption allows us to armor our communications to walk through that dangerous valley and get to the other side with some dignity left intact. That's the first thing that we need to establish to protect the content of our communications. The second thing, which is a much more difficult problem, is how do we protect the fact that the communication occurred at all in the first place, the metadata, right? There's what you said, and then there's also the fact that you said something at all. Can we protect the fact that you called your mother, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your professor, whatever? You called a hospital. You called an abortion clinic. You called a political group. You called a church. Any connection, where you spend your money, how you do it, where you travel, when you cross a border. Right now, we are living lives of unparalleled vulnerability to power. We live in a very safe time. Let's make no mistake about that, right? Everybody plays up the threat of terrorism. But if you look at any metric of mortality, if you look at any metric of quality of life, we're doing pretty good relative to historic circumstances. Yet at the same time, our ability to resist powerful institutions, be they corporate, be they governmental, has never been less than it is today. Because their powers throughout history have been very closely connected to ours, right? When people only had muskets, the government had to be pretty careful. When people only had horses, there was only so much they could do. When you have one side that has the largest surveillance machine that has ever been completed on a global basis in the history of humanity, and they have the exclusive use of it, and we, on the other hand, have smartphones that are saying everywhere we go all the time, every purchase we make, every website we visit, we need to think about what that means. It means we are creating permanent records of our daily activities that could be used for purposes that we will never know and have no say in. We have an obligation and we have a right to change the game and say, yes, if governments, if courts want to monitor criminals, they can do so. They can go to a judge. They can say, this is the evidence that we need to monitor this individual. But the days where they could monitor everyone, everywhere, all the time, simply what the government calls by means of bulk collection, which is the government euphemism for mass surveillance. They say, we just want to collect everything and store it in case we want to search it later. Those days are numbered. We are going to move towards a freer and fairer future rather than simply the one that has already been laid out for us. We are at a decision point, and we could have a very dark future or a very bright future, but the ultimate determination of which fork in the road we take won't be my decision. It won't be the government's decision. It will be your generation's decision. And I'm looking forward to seeing what it is that you guys actually decide.